everyone, and welcome. I'm Tammy L. Grace, and I'm so happy you joined us tonight. I'm super excited because we've got a great guest with us. My writing buddy, Mara Purl, and I decided we would have a fun virtual road trip this summer, and I can't believe we're already reaching the end of our trip. But tonight we're on our third stop, and we're in beautiful Florida with Bette Lee Crosby, and we couldn't be happier to have her with us. And I just want to go over a couple of things so you know what to expect tonight. First up, each of us has a very special offer for you. We've got some deals on a book in one of our series, and we're inviting readers into our worlds that we've created, and we're going to make it really easy for you to try us out if you're new to us. Mara has a 99-cent deal on the first in her series. Bette has a 99-cent deal on Memory House, another first in the series. And I've got a free download on the first in my new Sisters of the Heart series. So we'll be putting links in for you in the comments when we're done chatting. That'll make it easy for you to go and find those deals and grab them. And the other thing we want to let you know about is we've got a fun giveaway set up for you. One lucky reader is going to get 3 print books, one from each of us. And all you need to do to enter is just simply comment on this post with a comment or question. Let us know what you think of our books or anything else you want to share with us. And the only caveat to that is these are USA only due to shipping. So just be sure and pop in a comment. And if we don't get to you live, which we probably won't because we're pretty chatty, we will come back and circle back and answer any questions you have. One more special thing tonight is it's Mara's birthday month, so she's going to offer an extra free print book to anyone who'd like to share her book with a book club, and she'll tell you more about that. So I'm going to kick us off and tell you a little bit about my new series that I wrote this year. It's women's fiction. It's called Sisters of the Heart series. It's set in Southern Oregon. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's the Rogue River Valley around Medford, Oregon. And I created a fictional little town called Lavender Valley. And the basis of it is a woman named Jewel, who is a foster mom. Her and her husband can't have children, so they decide to become foster parents. And over decades, she fosters over 55 children, but she forms a really special bond with 5 girls that come to live with her. And what's interesting about it is none of them ever met while they were growing up. They were all with her at different times. But she's getting older and she's in her 80s, and she has a last wish that she leaves, and she wants all of these girls to come back to the farm. She wants them to meet each other, and she thinks they need their Sisters of the Heart. And so as the first book in the series is called Greetings from Lavender Valley, and that's my free download. So if you are willing to read a digital book, you can go grab it free at all the various retailers. And then each of the subsequent books is in Kindle Unlimited, and you can buy it on Kindle or get it in print. All the books are available in print as well. But in Greetings, Jewel gives you a little bit of an introduction to her life, and then she introduces you to each of the girls when they arrive at the farm and her impressions of them. And then throughout the book, she corresponds with them in letters. And so you'll get to know Jewel and you'll get to know each of the girls. And then in each of the other books, the main character is one of the Sisters of the Heart. So each person, each of the girls gets their own story, and you get to hear more about them. But it kicks off with the first Sister of the Heart named Harry, who's actually named Harriet. And she's just retiring as a deputy chief in the Salem Police Department. And so she's kind of at loose ends and is not sure what to do when she gets a letter asking her to take over Jewel's estate and find these 4 other foster girls and bring them back to the farm. So that's kind of how the stories kick off and blend. And then readers are enjoying this. I'm hearing a lot of comments from them on their favorite sister, and Book 5 just came out today. It's called Comfort in Lavender Valley. And then the last book will be out in October. So you can binge the entire series pretty quickly if you're new to it. But I hope you will take advantage of the freebie and give it a try and escape to Lavender Valley. And with that, I'll let Mara take the next bit and tell you more about her series.
Thank you, Tammy. I'm one of those fans of yours who's been so enjoying Lavender Valley.
Well,
I'm not
thank
sure
you.
that I have a favorite sister because I love them all. Anyway, it's very, very charming and cozy, and you're dealing at the same time with some tough issues. And this is one of the things I love about our genre. I love about women's fiction. I know that all three of us delve into deeper issues of women's lives. And that's what happens in my fictional town of Milford-Haven, which is located on California's central coast. It's about halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And so it's at least a 4-hour drive from each place. So it's just enough out of the way that it hasn't become, overdeveloped, and it's still a bit rustic. So my protagonist is a painter, and she grew up in a very privileged life in Marin County in Belvedere, just north of San Francisco. And she's got this great family, very interesting, smart, supportive parents, and a very successful sister who's working in the financial field. But Miranda doesn't quite fit with the rest of her family members because she's an artist. They don't quite understand what she does, and she doesn't know how to explain it very well. So she gets a certain amount of success in San Francisco, but she realizes there's a dissonance because she likes to paint wildlife and landscapes, but here she is living in the city. So she does a sketch from her imagination. It happens to be a little lighthouse on a coastal setting. And one day she takes a drive south. And as she's driving, she sees the very thing that she sketched, which is so startling that she pulls off the road and pulls into this little town and stops into the diner, chats with the owner. Their conversation is overheard by the head of the Environmental Planning Commission, who says, "By the way, I'm looking for someone who paints murals." Well, that's exactly what Miranda does. So she gets hired. So here she is. She thought she was just maybe stopping for lunch in this little town, and all of a sudden these doors begin to open. So she makes what is perhaps a rather strange choice and uproots herself and moves. So so these two women that she meets that first day turn out to be very good friends. One of them is Sally, who owns Sally's Restaurant, a wonderful sort of salt of the earth gal. And the other is the head of the Environmental Planning Commission, who turns into kind of a second mother, a wonderful mentor, and other relationships begin. And so my series, I basically have 3 trilogies. There are 3 novels, and then there are 3 adventure novelettes, all about Miranda going off to paint wildlife. And then there are 3 holiday stories. But what starts it all is When the Heart Listens, and that's the 99-cent deal for during our tour. And the interesting thing is I owe this book to a wonderful book club. I was invited to speak at this book club in the Central Coast, and they had read some of my books, and they asked questions about why did Miranda ever come to Milford-Haven in the first place? Well, I knew the answers, but I realized I hadn't written that. So that's what led to my writing this book, and it's dedicated to them. And it's one of the reasons I have a very sort of soft spot for book clubs. That's why if you have a book club and you'd like to feature my series, just put it in the comment and I'll make sure that I send a book to you. So that's a little bit about Milford-Haven. And so, Betty, we would love to hear about your writing. I know you have multiple series, and we're so excited to be with you today.
Well, I'm very excited to be here. It's certainly a lot of fun, and I've been looking forward to it. Today, the 99-cent deal that I have is not my newest book, which I will read from the newest book, but I'll tell you a little bit about Memory House. It's the 99-cent deal, and it's book 1 in the series. This happens to be one of my favorite series, and the reason why is because it's magical. And when I say magical, there is a touch of magical realism throughout all the books in this series. And it starts with, Memory House starts with a 98-year-old, a woman who's turning 90, and she has the ability to touch an inanimate object and feel the memories that have been left behind in it. But she feels she's getting older now, and she really needs to pass this ability along to someone else. And she does so when a young girl comes to her door who has the same violet eyes that she has. So that's kind of a little bit about Memory House, and it leads you into the story. And she leads a life that was pretty, the young girl, Annie Cross, leaves New York and a really bad boyfriend and a bad relationship. And she finds herself just moving to Virginia, where this woman lives, and just discovers that instead of getting rid of all the memories, she's really looking forward to finding them all. And so she does. And you know, the cool thing about this is that book 1 of Memory House ties into books from some of my other series. Like there's a bicycle in it, and you'll find that same bicycle in Memory House. The bicycle, when they find the bicycle owner, he's an old man, but in Spare Change, he's an 11-year-old boy. So it's kind of cool, because it's like that thread that runs through our life and takes you from one place to another. So it's kind of fun. And then I do have a new release. It's just out a short while now. And unfortunately, we had a family tragedy 2 days before the release. So I had to cancel everything for the release. And this book has kind of tiptoed into the marketplace, as opposed to landing with a big splash. Usually I'll do a party or something, and this is Beyond Betrayal. And the funny thing is that this is probably the most poignant book I've written to date, in that it really is about a very serious issue, and it deals with a woman's really, really deep emotions, not, you know, I'm going to get over this and find a new love immediately. But it deals with like the really, what do you do after you've been betrayed kind of feeling. And it's not that easy to get over. And I think that the comments that I've been getting from people who have read it are, oh, I so identified with this character. And you know, it's true. There are many women that have been put in this situation. In Beyond Betrayal, what happens is the protagonist, her husband dies, and she knows nothing about what he's done. And it turns out that she finds out that he was leading a whole other life as well as hers. And she feels very betrayed. And the thing is, because he's gone, there's no way for her to release that anger. She's stuck with it. You know, she has to carry it around like a sack of stones on her back. And that's the hard part, is finding yourself afterwards. That's the one I'll read from later on today. And Tammy, I'll hand it back to you to move the conversation forward.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted there, trying not to make noise, but when you talked about that, I'm like, yes, that's a difficult situation, because you have no one to talk to and you have no answers that, you know, to get.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, I think that sounds excellent, Betty. So what we're going to do for this next little segment is each of us is going to read an excerpt for you. And I love this idea, because there is nothing I liked more growing up than having our teacher read to us in class, or having my parents read to me in the evening. So we want you to kind of snuggle into your favorite little spot and maybe grab a cup of tea or whatever you're drinking, and just immerse yourself and the worlds that we've created for you and give you a little taste of what you might expect in our books. And Betty is going to kick us off with Beyond Betrayal, her newest release.
Thank you, Tammy. I'll start by saying I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book. And in my book, very often, I let the characters speak directly to the reader. And that's an italicized chapter. And it's usually really short. And the character is just explaining their feelings directly to the reader. And then it goes into the storytelling of the story. So it will go back and forth, and throughout the book, the character, and not just one character, sometimes it's several different characters that at different times will render their thoughts on any given subject. So this opens with the protagonist, Susan, speaking, and she says, "In the distance, there is a chime of church bells. I wake and for a moment wonder if that's where I should be. It's been said that in church a person can find forgiveness, but I doubt that applies to me. There are many kinds of sin, but mine is the worst. It's an ugly bitterness hidden in the corner of my heart. No one sees it, but I feel the weight of it. It's the huge stone I carry with me every day. It's the rock-hard boulder that presses against my chest when I try to sleep at night. More than anything, I'd like to rid myself of this burden, but to do so requires forgiveness, and I have none to give. How can I possibly forgive a man who left me nothing of the past, a man who has taken away whatever joy I hope for in the future? He's gone, but I'm left with all this anger trapped inside of me. I live in a house that echoes of emptiness. I live with memories that are shallow and without an ounce of substance. How can a person forgive that? Kyle and I were not always as we were at the end. There was a time when we would walk hand in hand, his fingers intertwined with mine, our hearts open and honest. We had plans for a life more beautiful than could be imagined. Looking back, I can't help but wonder what happened. Were our dreams too big? The future too much of a fairy tale? Did I change? Did he? There's no way of knowing now, and it's too late to make amends, too late for apologies. I asked myself, if given a second chance, could I change the way things turned out? More importantly, knowing what I know now, would I want to? The day he was laid to rest, it was bitter cold. As I stood there thinking of how I would never again see him, an icy chill settled in my bones, and it's still with me. At the time, I thought that would be the most beautiful, most difficult day of my life. I thought if I made it through that day, I'd somehow find strength enough to move forward and find a reason for living. I knew nothing of the terrible truth that would ultimately change my world. 1 month earlier, when Susan Jean Robertson disappeared from the throng of mourners milling about the room, no one noticed. They were too busy consoling one another. Business associates and people she barely knew stood shoulder to shoulder, drinking scotch or bourbon, telling stories, sharing memories of Kyle. Cakes and casseroles covered the kitchen counter, and still people carried in more. Susan didn't want their food or their sympathy. She wanted to talk to Kyle, and she wanted to talk to him alone. She was weary of hearing how everyone's clever anecdotes and tales of how much he would be missed. Sure, they'd miss him for a little while, but she'd miss him for an eternity. Had anyone thought of that? Weary of hearing people say they'd be there for her whatever she needed, she feigned a headache, then slipped into the bedroom and closed the door. Shedding the black dress, she pulled on a pair of worn jeans, a turtleneck, then layered on 2 wool sweaters. The day had turned damp and bitter. A thread of snow was in the air, but the sweaters were all she could manage. There was no way she could retrieve a coat from the hall closet without being noticed. Slipping silently out the kitchen door, she circled around to the garage, then clicked a code into the keypad. As the door rumbled up, she glanced back to make certain the noise had gone undetected, then slid behind the wheel. Seconds later, the black Saab backed out of the garage and sped away. With the weight of regret growing heavier and heavier in her chest, Susan drove westward on Route 22. She paid little attention to the darkness as it crept across the sky and thought only of the things that had gone unsaid, the little hurts she'd pushed to the back of her mind, the resentment hidden behind a wall of silence. She should have spoken up, insisted that Kyle listen. If only she'd done that, they might have worked through their problems. Now it was too late. By the time she arrived at Brookside Cemetery, the entrance gates were closed and bolted shut. She parked in the driveway, got out of the car, and stood there with her fingers wrapped around the iron gate. In the distance, she could see the fresh patch of brown earth, the baskets of flowers and standing wreaths. He was there, his head resting on a white satin pillow. She would never again have to worry about where he was at night or what time he was coming home. Pressing her face to the gate, Susan let the tears come as she whispered the thought that had been haunting her for the past 3 days. I'm so sorry, Kyle. Dear God, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to end the way it did. You know I didn't. I love you. I've always loved you. I didn't mean the things I said in that last argument. I'm sure you didn't either. All that anger was too much for your heart. That's what caused it to stop beating. I know it is. If I could take everything back, I would. I'd do it in a heartbeat. All those hateful words, the bitterness. Her voice cracked, and loosening her grip on the bars, she dropped to her knees, remembering the way it was. Oh my God, we were so mean to each other that night. She turned, leaned her back against the gate, and sat sobbing, the bitter cold of the cement seeping into her bones and her tears icy against her cheeks. If only I'd been more understanding about everything, accepted that working late was part of your job. Now look where all that anger has taken us. You're gone, and I'm left with the guilt of your death. I wish it were me, not you, in that casket. That's where I'm going to stop.
Whoa,
Wow.
It does get happier.
wow, that's
But
powerful.
it's, I think it's about the anguish that a woman goes through when something like this happens. And
Yes.
it's very real, I think. I've been through it, and now my sister is going through it. And I think it's very real to what people do go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing.
Bless you.
Well, I think I'm up next, and
Wow.
so I'll read the first chapter of When the Heart Listens, and this is the prequel to the series, and this is the one that you can grab for 99 cents as an ebook. Chapter 1. Veronica Jones lifted the monogrammed napkin from her lap and touched it to the corners of her mouth. Folding the smooth cloth in half, she pulled it through the silver napkin ring that bore the same initials as the linen. The sunroom where she and her husband, and their daughters when they were home, usually shared breakfast, felt chilly but cheerful, with early forsythia blooms in the garden emanating vivid yellow through French doors and tall windows. Very, as her family and friends called her, looked across the small table at her husband of many years, still handsome and straight-backed, the gray at his temples lending a distinguished touch to his sculpted face. I've got to do something for the girls, she said, eyeing the coffee pot and considering whether she'd allow herself another half cup. You're always doing something about the girls, Charles said, not even looking over the top of the San Francisco Chronicle he read religiously every morning. But you know what I mean, Charles. One is living in that icy tower of glass. The other is practically buried in that basement. Neither of them is truly happy. Neither is really safe. Charles folded his paper and looked into her blue eyes. Don't fret, dear. They're grown women now, you know. You can't live their lives for them. You can't tell them what to do. From his mollifying tone and from the softness of his expression, she knew he sympathized. Still, his words rankled. She couldn't bear the idea of not being able to help her daughters, whether or not they asked. She had, in fact, come up with a plan. Well, a partial plan. Though she had no intention of revealing details to their father just yet, she did think a mention might be polite. Uh-oh, he said, shaking his head while he poured himself a fresh cup of coffee. You're up to something. Let's have it. Well, she began, it would save them both money and they'd be far more secure. Very smiled, and when her husband squinted, she saw with satisfaction that amusement was already beginning to coax a smile at the edges of his mouth. Good. I'll make him my co-conspirator before he even knows what he's sanctioning. Meredith Jones pressed the button for 22 and closed her eyes as a gust of wind swirled through the lobby and sent a blast into the elevator. April breezes howled through the shaft until the doors fully closed, and she felt her heart hitch right along with the car as it climbed through the lower floors. With a ding, the doors flew open and she stepped into the faux marble floor, then clacked down the hallway to her unit, wrinkling her nose at the cooking smells that clung to the wallpaper in the corridor. Sliding the key into her lock, she pushed open her door and flung off her high heels even before the metal door slammed shut behind her. Ugh, she said aloud, dropping her briefcase, throwing her coat over the back of a bar stool, and opening the fridge. She reached inside for a half-finished bottle of Chardonnay, poured herself a glass, then settled on the sofa, wiggling her toes as she stretched her leg across the cushions. Missed it again, she said, bemoaning that she never managed to get home in time to see the sunset. But what little I saw from the car was gorgeous. For a new VP of client relations at a high-powered financial management firm, working late came with the territory. Still, she felt entitled to complain in the privacy of her own apartment. When her stomach rumbled, she remembered that bellyaching wouldn't put food on her table. Pizza Palace, she wondered aloud. They did have a great Italian salad. Szechuan Sensation sounded more appealing, though, and she stepped to the kitchen counter, picked up the handset with her favorite restaurants programmed into the speed dial function, and placed the call. By the time she changed into her dove gray sweatpants and zippered top, prepared a tray, and turned on her TV, the intercom began buzzing. A few minutes later, while she deftly picked at her Szechuan chicken and spicy string beans, she rewound the tape in her VCR and hit play, laughing aloud when Kramer, looking as if he'd just stuck his finger in an electrical outlet, walked across the hall and into Jerry's apartment to ask an inane question. It was a show about nothing, Meredith decided, which was why she enjoyed watching it. How else could she take her mind off the daily stress and unwind? Suddenly, the crisp bite of spicy chicken trapped between her chopsticks didn't look as delicious as it had a moment earlier. I've managed to avoid thinking about it for a whole hour and a half, and now it's back, damn it. Albert Rothman, recently named senior partner, and the youngest ever to be so named, knew how brilliant he was, how valuable to the firm, and he had his eye on wealth to rival sultans. But he had a blind spot about his sex appeal. Convinced any woman would be grateful to be blessed by his attentions, he'd so far managed only to offend lesser employees, each of whom had been quietly dismissed with an attractive financial bonus. And Meredith only knew about these arrangements because she herself had now made partner. Today, however, he'd managed to offend her twice in two distinct ways. First, he'd questioned her data interpretation at her debut partner presentation. Though it had stung, she'd accepted the criticism graciously, acknowledging the new alpha dog, flattering him by treating him as leader, though in truth he was only a couple of years older than she. Second, he'd propositioned her. Talk about a no-win scenario, Meredith thought bitterly. She knew perfectly well how the game was played. Be charming, but not overtly flirtatious. Dress in a way that was appealing, but not sexy. Do your work better than any of the male partners. A mentor had once said to her, Meredith, in this business, you have to be either very good or very bad. She hadn't understood what he meant at first, so he'd explained. If you plan to sleep your way to the top, be strategic and don't get emotionally involved. If you don't plan to use sex to get ahead, be sure not to sleep with anyone to get ahead. It'll be used against you. Best advice I ever got, she mused. She'd adhered to his suggestion and never dated anyone in the firm. In fact, she felt professional behavior at work was the gold standard. She also felt that what she did on her own time was her own business. She glanced at her chopsticks as though she had no idea what to do with them and set them aside as her thoughts came back to Albert. Their paths were entwined at work. Would she be interested in dating him if not? Her instincts told her he was too self-involved, and thought too little of women to to truly hold her interest. In any case, because of their work connection, the point was moot. Her own personal rules wouldn't allow involvement with him. So where did that leave her now? Damned if I do, damned if I don't. If she turned him down, he'd take offense and try his best to take it out of her career performance one way or another. If she accepted his invitation, drink and dinner for now, but who knows what he really expected. She'd be stepping into a quagmire. Hell with it, she said, pressing the fast forward button on her remote. I'm not going out with that man. She took a deep breath and looked out the picture window at the view of the city now sparkling against a field of black. Between adjacent tall buildings, she could see the string of lights outlining the Golden Gate Bridge. If she lost her job, she'd certainly have to move out of this apartment with its privileged views. But that wouldn't be the end of the world. With the mental toughness that had ensured her rapid ascent in a male-dominated career, she refused to think about Albert any longer. Instead, she swept away the debris of her dinner, took a hot bath, set her alarm, and curled up with a steamy romance novel. In her fantasies, a real relationship with a good man was well within the realm of possibility. Miranda Jones pushed more cadmium yellow medium hue paint from the tube onto her palette. To it, she added a touch of Hansa yellow, then experimented by using her brush to swipe through a touch of Naples, just to see whether the mixture would give her the variation of depth she wanted. She loved the Daniel Smith paint, the luminous, vivid transparency, how easy they were to work with, and how permanent the hues. She also liked that she could get the same array of colors, whether she worked in watercolor or oils, as she did today. She glanced around the Bays Art Co-op studio and gallery, where she was one of several artists who rented space. More than a cubicle, less than a closed room, each of them had 3 standing walls on which to hang completed pieces, plus work tables, easels, small display tables, and bins for posters and prints. 2 slots away from the large plate glass window in front, Miranda's heard some comings and goings, but paid no attention, lost in her work. This April, she found herself craving the color yellow. Every touch of it drew her eye, whether of a forsythia bush in bloom, a school bus trundling by, or a bright canary umbrella on someone's balcony. By training and by inclination, she usually painted from life, from seeing something, seeing into it, or studying its surface, or sometimes even seeing through it to notice the layer behind, and how that context affected her understanding of the subject. Sunset on clouds, distant hills, tiny grasses less than a foot away, the eyelashes on a big cat, the muscled stance of a buck silhouetted on a ridge. All of it mattered, informed her consciousness, and spoke to her heart. There were other days that she painted from an inner vision, a close-up detail she hadn't realized she'd noticed, or an inscape that began to take form. Today was one of those days. She'd become aware of it this morning, as though puzzle pieces began to assemble. By this afternoon, she knew she'd have no choice but to access the developing image by the most direct route, picking up her paintbrush. It had felt electric today, when brain met hand, met brush, met paintboard. And most of it was coming out yellow. Well, I suppose spring itself is pouring through me and out onto the paper. Then suddenly it seemed complete. The upper portion of the image was bright, solid blue, the middle a band of sapphire, the front a high wall of hundreds of tiny blossoms in bloom, each its own shade of yellow, and all of them interactions of mustard. She took a deep breath, absently twisted a strand of long dark hair that had come loose from her scrunchie, and considered the image that now filled the canvas. It's got to be in bloom all over the hills south of here. I just have to go and see them for myself. So that's chapter 1. And what she described is actually the cover of the book.
Oh, your covers are so pretty, Mara. They just look like real paintings. I love them.
Thank you. I have a wonderful artist who does them.
We've got a few comments, so I was just going to butt in here with that before I start reading.
Great.
Lots of people saying hello. Lots of people telling Betty how wonderful her book sounds, and they can't wait to read it.
Good.
Lots of people saying, oh, they can't wait to read Mara's, and it's on their list to read.
Thank you.
And let's see. Oh, we had a question. What inspired each of us to become an author? Anybody want to take that one?
Betty, you want to start?
For me, it's my mom. And my family has a Southern heritage, and Southerners are born storytellers. Now, my mom never wrote at all, but she was a mesmerizing storyteller. I remember when we were kids, she would start telling a story, and all my little friends would be gathered around, just sitting there open mouthed, listening to every word my mother said. And she made those stories come so alive that you just felt like you were part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I write the way I do. I remember so much how she made me feel when she was reading that story. And that's how I want to make my readers feel, like they're right in there. They really care about that heroine. And my mom was telling the story, you would really care that that little boy got away from the bear that was chasing him. You know, you'd really be totally vested in it. And I think that that's what gave me a real love for storytelling. I always say I'm a much better storyteller than I am writer. And if it weren't for editors, I think I'd have 98 commas in the wrong place.
Oh, I so agree with you how important our editors are.
My
God
editor
bless
tells
them.
me I'm the queen of misplaced commas.
I think I've heard that comment too. Well, for me, like Betty, I think I come from a family of storytellers. In my case, I came from a theater family. And so my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents, all at one point or another were working in the theater. And so, gee, I wonder why, but I thought starting at about age 3 that the hearth was a stage. And so I thought one was supposed to do a show every night. And so I wrote a play for each evening. And my parents would roll their eyes and say, well, Mara wants to do a play now. So off we would go after dinner, and Mara would do her little play. And when my sister was born, I began thrusting pages at her. Like, can you read yet? This is your part. And so I've always written. I wrote little books. My mother helped me bind my first book when I was 5. I was very excited. I thought it was published. I wrote scripts. I created a radio drama for the BBC, and that's what developed into my novels. So I guess there was just no escape for me. I just had to be a writer.
That's fascinating. I think I'm more
It's a nice
boring
story.
than the two of you. I have always loved to read, and so reading was just such a fun escape for me. And I think kind of like what Betty said about wanting to be able to create that magic for others, I think is what led me to want to write books. I've always wanted to write books. And in middle school, I had an English teacher who, for the first time, introduced creative writing. You know, it had never really been introduced to me before that. And that kind of opened my eyes to the idea of, you know, writing for fun and writing for enjoyment instead of like papers and things that you had to do for homework. So that was when I think I got the bug, but I didn't get to actually work on it till much later in life. So, okay. So I'm going to go back to our reading excerpts, and I'm going to read from Greetings from Lavender Valley. And this is the first chapter. It's called The Arrival, and this book is available in print, of course, but it's a free download at all retailers. So if you like what you hear, you might want to go grab it. Jewel swept her eyes over the upstairs bedroom one more time. She ran her hand over the gingham bedspread and straightened the matching pillow sham. then moved to the white bookcase she had painted herself and touched the spines of the Little House on the Prairie books, adjusting one of them that was sticking out from the others. Shelved beside them, the Anne of Green Gables series she had found at a yard sale looked like new. She couldn't wait to share the books with the girl who would soon be sleeping in the sunlit room. Jewel adjusted the vase on the bedside table and bent to sniff the fresh lilac she had trimmed from the bushes along the fence. The delightful smell infused the air, reminding Jewel of her own grandmother. This wasn't her first trip up the stairs to check on the room she had spent hours preparing, but it was almost 3 o'clock, and she had to take one last look. She couldn't resist one more adjustment to the eyelet valance above the window before she dashed downstairs. The social worker from Medford was due in a few minutes, and Jewel wanted everything perfect. She ran the cloth over the counter in the kitchen before she put the kettle on to boil and straightened the napkins on the tea tray. Jewel had spent last night making 3 kinds of cookies to have on hand for the young girl she would soon meet. Georgia was her name, such a grown-up name for a little girl of 12. The farmhouse was spotless, with every window gleaming in the spring sunshine, bathing Lavender Valley farm. Jewel's nerves were getting the best of her as she paced the floor. The sound of the kettle beckoned her back to the stove, and with shaking fingers, she held the lid of the kettle and poured the boiling water into her teapot. As she did so, she gasped. No 12-year-old girl was going to want a cup of tea. What was she thinking? She replaced the hot kettle on the burner and hurried to the freezer. She popped open a can of frozen lemonade concentrate and spooned it into a pitcher. A bead of sweat formed at the base of Jewel's neck as she rushed to stir the lemonade with the wooden spoon. She added some ice cubes, wiped the counter again, and placed the pitcher on the dining room table, along with the tea service. She sighed as she put her hands on her hips. There, that's better. Bo, her golden retriever, sauntered to the door, his tail wagging in quick arcs. He was her early alert system. Jewel took off her apron, straightened her skirt, and made sure her crisp blouse was tucked in before following Bo to the front door. He was a sweet and friendly dog, but Jewel wasn't sure how Georgia would react to him. She shooed him over to his fluffy bed in the living room and told him to stay there. Jewel took a deep breath and counted to 10 before opening the front door, then hurried across the porch to greet her guests. Mrs. Parsons, the social worker who had a permanent scowl etched on her wide face, walked up the porch steps, holding the hand of a tall, slim girl with long, reddish-brown braids, as if making sure she wouldn't escape. The young girl, wearing a print dress with a frayed hem, carried a battered suitcase, and Mrs. Parsons gripped the handles of a worn fabric bag. Jewel caught the girl's eye. The poor thing looked terrified, her brown eyes wide and her face pale. She reminded Jewel of a wary doe. Hello, Georgia, I'm Jewel. May I take that bag for you? She extended her hand. Georgia nodded but said nothing, even as Jewel took the bag from her. Jewel held the front door open for both of them. I've got some refreshments made for us, but I could show you your bedroom first. It's just up the stairs. Georgia remained silent. Jewel looked to Mrs. Parsons for guidance, but didn't get as much as a nod from her. Jewel gripped the suitcase tighter and led the way up the stairs. She gestured at the open door. This is it. I can help you get your things organized and put away later. She pointed at the small white desk that matched the bookcase. My husband, Chuck, made that desk for you so you'd have a spot to do your homework. You'll meet him tonight. Jewel set the suitcase down next to the dresser and took the tote bag from Miss Parsons. She put the bag in the corner, on the chair in the corner, where a stuffed bear rested. I wasn't sure if you were too old for stuffed animals, she said to Georgia, trying again. But when I saw this guy, I thought he'd be a perfect roommate for you. Without a word, Georgia moved toward the bear and brushed her hand over its head. Mrs. Parsons studied the room and rewarded Jewel with a curt nod. In profile, Jewel realized what a pointy nose the woman had and thought she'd make the perfect witch for Halloween. She shoved that thought away lest she giggle. Jewel felt like she was back in high school, awaiting judgment from the English teacher nobody liked. Her heart broke for Georgia, who looked as terrified as Jewel had felt back then. How about we have some cookies? I've got them waiting in the dining room. Mrs. Parsons led the way down the stairs, followed by Georgia. Jewel noticed a slump in the girl's shoulder as she trudged down each step. Jewel poured lemonade for Georgia first. With a smile, Jewel set the glass in front of her and offered her first choice from the plate of cookies. I've got chocolate chip, snickerdoodle, and peanut butter. Georgia took a snickerdoodle and Mrs. Parsons waved the plate away. With her stomach fluttering, Jewel was certain she must have swallowed one of the butterflies that flew around the lilacs as she poured tea for Mrs. Parsons and herself. Then she took a cookie and added it to her plate with the hope a nibble would give her stomach something productive to do. Mrs. Parsons took a file from her handbag and before Jewel could swallow a sip from her cup, started bombarding her with information related to the middle school Georgia would attend in Medford, the bus schedule, the home visits Mrs. Parsons would be performing to check on Jewel and Chuck, and a stack of forms related to medical care and reimbursement paperwork. With her spiel delivered, Mrs. Parsons took one gulp from her cup and stood. Well, I'll be going. I'll check on you in 2 weeks, Mrs. Austin, unless you need something before then. She narrowed her eyes at Georgia. You be a good young lady. Jewel swallowed the lump in her throat and hurried to get out of her chair. By the time she reached the front door, Mrs. Parsons was already down the steps and heading to her old county-issued station wagon. The driver's door slammed shut and the engine roared to life. Jewel stood on her porch and with an immense sigh of relief watched the car head down her long driveway. Mrs. Parsons terrified her. She could only imagine the impact she had on children. Back inside, Bo raised his head to look at her hopefully. Jewel held up her hand. Just a minute, boy. She went into the kitchen and sat down next to Georgia again. That woman scares me, she said before taking a bite of her cookie. She stole a glance at the young girl, but Georgia didn't react at all. The social worker had only told Jewel and Chuck that Georgia's mother was deceased and her father in prison. There were no relatives that would take her in. She had a younger sister who was not quite 2 years old and had already been placed with a family in Portland who wanted to adopt her. When they'd asked about the prospect of someone adopting Georgia, Mrs. Parsons laughed. She told them they were naive and didn't understand that nobody wanted to adopt the older kids. The blank and sad look on Georgia's face was enough to bring tears to Jewel's eyes. She blinked several times as she hid her mouth behind her teacup. She had to get through to the poor girl sitting at her table. Chuck had voiced his concern that Jewel's heart might be too soft to take on fostering, still reeling from the news from the doctor that they could not have children. He didn't want more sadness inflicted upon his wife. Chuck will be home from his job at the road department in an hour or so. He's looking forward to meeting you. I've got a meatloaf ready to put in the oven. Do you like meatloaf? I'm making some potatoes and green beans to go with it. Georgia nodded. Yes, ma'am. You can call me Jewel, sweetie. She glanced across to the living room. I want to introduce you to my very best friend. Do you like dogs? Georgia nodded and used her napkin to wipe her hands. Jewel whistled and Bo came charging around the corner, tail wagging, tongue out. He bypassed Jewel and went right to Georgia, wiggling as he placed his head in her lap, and then started to lift his paws. Worried he might be too much for her, Jewel jumped from her chair, scraping it across the wooden floor. Georgia flinched and shrunk away, her gaze focused on the ground. With slower movements, Jewel stepped to the other side of Georgia's chair and put gentle hands on Bo's shoulders to help him remember to keep his paws on the floor. What she ached to do instead was to wrap the poor girl in a hug. She could only imagine what Georgia had been through in her short life. Part of her didn't want to know. Now more than ever, she wanted to earn Georgia's trust and comfort her. Without much experience with children, she wasn't sure how to accomplish it, but Jewel had good instincts and trusted her heart to guide her. Her heart warmed as Georgia's hand moved from her lap to the top of Bo's head. He stretched his big tongue out and gave her a quick lick. Not quite a smile, but the edges of Georgia's lip lifted ever so slightly, and her eyes softened when they found Bo's. That tiny sparkle of encouragement was all Jewel needed. She would find a way to connect with Georgia and would give her all the love she already held in her heart. She might not have a child related to her, but she would make a difference in Georgia's life and in the lives of as many children like her that Jackson County saw fit to place in her care.
Wow,
That's a taste.
lovely.
So, ladies, let me see
Poignant.
if we have any more little questions that we could answer real quickly. Lots of love from everybody saying they've read all of Betty's books and they love her humor. Karina says, if you had the opportunity to live anywhere in the world for a year when writing a book that took place in that same setting, where would you choose? And I would say I would choose England or Ireland. That would be my
Where?
England or Ireland.
And I would choose Wales.
What about you, Betty?
I don't know, well, I did Paris, actually. You know, we went to Paris and we did a home exchange, and we were over there for 3 weeks. And what happened was they had a heat wave, an unexpected heat wave. Now, Paris is always chilly. We've been there before, and they're always chilly. So I brought all long sleeve tops and black pants and black tops and, you know, boots and stuff like that. I was really wishing I had my sandals and my sundresses, but the temperature went up to 104. They
Whoa.
opened the parks so that people could sleep in the parks if they wanted to all night. And we were in a little apartment. It was a really cute apartment that we did as a home exchange. And there was one fan. So some evenings it was too hot to really just walk around. And I would put the fan on and I sat there and I started writing a book. And it's part of this Memory House series, but it's called What the Heart Remembers. And it's very true about like all the streets and everything, because I wrote it when I was there and I knew, you know, it's such a picturesque city. I mean,
Oh, yes.
so much to talk about.
Wonderful.
Oh, that's
Well,
fun.
so my fictional town is called Milford-Haven, but there is a real town called Milford-Haven on the west coast of Wales, which is an area that very closely resembles the central coast of California. So when my show was on the BBC, I was invited to visit there, and I saw all these parallels and made, you know, good friends and have stayed in touch. Well, last year, my husband and I spent 6 weeks in the UK.
Oh.
And we went back to Milford-Haven and I launched a literacy project with students there. And together we wrote a book that's just been published in the UK, which is the history of Milford-Haven, focusing on 5 different periods, starting with the Iron Age, believe it or not, and going through the Quakers, the Victorian era up to the present. And the students just did a phenomenal job. So, you know, I would go back in a heartbeat and continue.
Oh, what an awesome
working with them.
experience
Oh.
that was.
Very, very low. You know, this chapter of life, being able to mentor people, pay it forward, as it were, is just
Yes.
really thrilling. But of course, I also started writing my own little story that's connected, so I can connect the Milford-Havens, you know, fictionally.
That's fun.
Very fun.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This has been lots of fun. I've really enjoyed the readings and I hope everybody else did too. Remember to pick up those deals. Mara's got a 99-cent first in series, as does Betty. She's got Memory House on sale for 99 cents. And I've got a free download in Greetings from Lavender Valley. So be sure and grab those. I'll put the links in the comments for everybody so we make it easy. And also remember, we've got a giveaway going on through Sunday. So be sure and comment or ask us a question. We'll circle back and answer those for you. And we'll pick one lucky reader to win 3 print books on Sunday and tag you. So watch for that. And in the meantime, we hope you have a great evening and enjoy all the books that you can read. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
just
It
wanted to
was
thank you
delightful to
again.
be here.
You know, it
Good
was
night,
wonderful,
everyone.
wonderful to have you. And Tammy, thank you so much for
Yes.
our entire summer tour. It has
Oh.
been so lovely to travel all over the country with you and spend time with our readers and spend time with our fellow authors. It's really been a joy. Thank you.
Oh, I've had a great time. It's been so much fun. So we enjoy doing this for our readers and love chatting with other authors. So
Right.
it's been great. You guys all have a great evening and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.